Karen fell into a ditch after being dragged by a goat right after she kicked a pregnant woman over a zoning dispute. Yeah, that happened. But before we got to the viral clip that made Marvin the most famous goat in the county, we had to deal with fake laws, clipboard meltdowns, and something called the Environmental HOA Task Force. It all started on a peaceful morning in Copper Ridge. The morning started like any other on our patch of Copper Ridge. A couple of goats were arguing over the same clump of grass. Emily was humming off-key while scooping feed, and the air smelled like dew, hay, and impending parenthood. She was 6 months along and glowing with the kind of calm only someone who'd survived both pregnancy cravings and goat head butts could manage. I was sipping burnt coffee from a chipped mug, leaning against the fence, feeling like the luckiest ex-Marine in the world. That illusion lasted about 12 minutes. From the far end of the field, I heard a sound that no peaceful morning deserves, the high-pitched screech of entitlement, amplified by sheer volume and possibly some form of inner resentment that had fermented for decades. Karen had arrived. Not just any Karen, our Karen. Clad in pastel activewear, oversized sunglasses, and gripping a smartphone like it was a sacred relic, she stood just outside the property line, nostrils flared, like she was about to charge. "The smell is unacceptable," she barked, pointing at our goats like they were chemical weapons. "Your livestock is lowering the neighborhood's value." Emily paused mid-scoop, glanced at me, then back at Karen like she was seeing a rare species of bird attempting to speak English. "We're zoned agricultural," I said, stepping forward with the kind of calm you only develop after years of being shot at and yelled at by drill sergeants. "This land isn't under your HOA, always has been private, always will be." Karen blinked as if I'd just spoken Sanskrit, then narrowed her eyes like she was about to challenge me to a fencing match. "That can't be right," she said, voice nasal and trembling with performative outrage. "I lived here 6 months. I know how this works." She pulled out a laminated sheet from a tote bag that said, "Compliance is kindness," and waved it at me like it was a warrant. Emily, sweet soul that she is, tried to defuse the moment with humor. "You know goats don't read zoning laws, right?" she joked, patting the head of Marvin, our most dramatic goat. He bleated in agreement. Karen's lip curled. "This isn't funny. There are standards, and then came the moment that shifted the entire tone from annoying to surreal. She held up her phone and barked, "I'm calling the HOA Environmental Board." The words echoed across the pasture like a threat made in a fevered dream. I blinked. "There's no such thing," I muttered. Emily whispered, "Is she live streaming?" And sure enough, on her screen, we could see ourselves framed like fugitives in a hostage video. Karen took a confident step forward and yelled into her phone cam, "These people are harboring illegal animals and contaminating community air. I demand an inspection." A goat sneezed loudly. Karen jumped. "You see, it's spreading." I exhaled slowly, set my mug on the fence post, and started walking toward the barn. Not in retreat, but because I suddenly had the sinking feeling I need to find the emergency folder and maybe my old radio too. Something told me this wasn't going to be the kind of drama that burned out quickly. It was just getting warmed up. I had just taken 2 steps toward the barn when Karen's voice hit a new octave. "Don't you walk away from me," she screeched, holding her phone higher like it was some kind of divine scepter. "I'm collecting evidence for the HOA Board of Environmental Safety," which, to be clear, is not a real thing. Emily looked at me with that tight smile she uses when she's trying very hard not to laugh at something wildly inappropriate. "Danny, is there a board of goat fumes I don't know about?" she whispered. I gave her a flat look and replied, "Only in Karen's jurisdiction." I turned back to our uninvited guest, still trying to keep the situation civil. "Ma'am, this land is zoned Ag 2, agricultural use. We've got documents from the county and a signed exemption that clearly states this property isn't under any HOA restrictions. You're wasting your breath and your data plan." Karen's eyebrows twitched like I'd just insulted her bloodline. "That's where you're wrong," she snapped, shifting her weight forward. "The HOA has expansion rights. I read about it on our Facebook group. It's called preventative compliance." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. "You can't just invent legal terms because they sound good," I said. "That's not how land works." Emily, ever the peacekeeper, stepped closer to the fence with a calming gesture. "Look, no one's trying to upset you," she said gently. "But we've lived here a long time. This is a working farm. Goats poop. That's part of the job." She smiled, even added a small shrug. Marvin, still munching grass at her feet, let out a lazy bleat. For a split second, I thought we'd reached a detente. But Karen's face suddenly hardened. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw set, and then, without warning, she kicked. It wasn't a slip, it wasn't a stumble, it was a full-on, mean-spirited snap of the leg straight into Emily's side. The sound it made, a dull thud against rib and breath, froze the world. Emily gasped, staggered backward, and collapsed onto one knee, clutching her belly with both arms. I didn't move. I couldn't. My brain just blanked. In the space of 3 seconds, all I could hear was the pounding in my ears and the panicked bleating of every goat in the vicinity. Marvin reared up in alarm. Buttons darted behind the water trough. Emily coughed out my name like it hurt her to say it. "Danny!" Her voice was barely audible. I dropped to her side instantly, heart hammering as my training kicked in, late and clumsy. She was breathing, but her face was pale and strained. Karen didn't run. She didn't apologize. She crossed her arms smugly and declared, loud enough for her phone mic to catch every syllable, "This will teach you people to respect the neighborhood code." I turned toward her, stunned, cradling Emily in my arms while the goats shifted restlessly around us. Karen still had her phone out, still recording as if she'd just won something. She didn't realize she just crossed a line that had nothing to do with zoning or fences or goat manure. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a neighbor's dog barking. Closer, Marvin was pawing at the clipboard Karen had dropped when she launched her assault. I looked at my wife, whispering that everything would be okay, even though I had no idea if that was true. But one thing was certain, whatever this was, it wasn't over. And the next move? It wouldn't be Karen's. Emily was still on the ground when I gently laid her against the fence post. She whispered that she was okay, but her knuckles were white from how tightly she clutched her side. Karen hadn't moved an inch. Still holding her phone like it was a sword, she was knighted by the HOA crown. I gave her one last look, the kind you give a rattlesnake right before backing away, then bolted toward the house. My boots slammed across the porch as I kicked open the side door, ran past the kitchen, and headed for the barn office. There, on the back shelf under a dusty file cabinet and a stack of old training manuals, was my old state-issued emergency radio. I'd kept it charged out of habit, never expecting to need it, until now. I yanked the antenna up, clicked aside, and tested a shortwave ping. Static, then a sharp chirp. I recognized the ID tone. "Unit 47 Bravo, this is Dwyer. I've got a code 42. Physical assault on private ag land. Suspect still on scene. Victim is pregnant and injured. I need backup priority." A pause, then a voice, low and calm. "Dwyer, that you?" I closed my eyes, exhaled once. "Yeah, Marcus, it's me. I'm 5 minutes out. Hold tight." Marcus Reed, now Sergeant Marcus Reed, was a friend and old squad buddy from field response training who'd taken the long road to local enforcement. If anyone would come in sharp, legal, and with zero patience for HOA drama, it was Marcus. When I returned to the field, Karen was mid-monologue into her phone camera. "Yes, I feared for my life," she said, feigning a gasp. "The woman lunged at me. The goats were aggressive, and I barely escaped a direct hoof attack. I'm honestly just trying to help our community stay safe." Emily, now sitting upright against the fence, muttered, "Did she just say hoof attack?" I nodded grimly. "It's going on her permanent record." Just then, movement at the edge of the fence line caught my eye. A small cluster of neighbors had started to gather, some concerned, some clearly amused. And leading the charge was Tyler, a high schooler from 3 houses down, camera strapped to his chest, GoPro already recording. Karen noticed the small crowd and immediately dialed up the drama. "They've been violating every code in the book," she shrieked. "Noise, smell, unregulated animals. That fence isn't even HOA approved. These people are a public hazard." Marvin, as if on cue, sneezed directly behind her. Tyler stifled a laugh. Emily leaned closer to me and whispered, "You think that's going viral?" "I'm counting on it," I said. The bleating resumed, louder this time, like the goats themselves were sick of the lies. Karen spun around, pointing a trembling finger at them. "They're not even vaccinated. This is biological terrorism." And then, tires on gravel. A black and white cruiser rolled up along the shoulder. Karen's posture straightened like someone plugged her into an ego charger. "Finally," she screamed, "arrest them. They're hiding illegal livestock." Her voice cracked on the last word like it physically hurt to say it. Marcus stepped out of the cruiser, tall, composed, eyes scanning everything. He glanced at me, at Emily, at Karen, who was practically bouncing, and then back at the gathering crowd. He didn't say a word, just closed the door and adjusted his belt. I could see it in his face. He smelled the crazy before he even took a full breath. And just like that, the real show began. Marcus walked straight past Karen like she was holding a pamphlet for a timeshare he didn't want. He knelt beside Emily, gently asked her name, gestational month, and whether she needed immediate medical assistance. Emily waved him off, determined to look stronger than she probably felt, but her voice was tight with pain. I handed Marcus a quick rundown, concise and clear, military style. He nodded once, then finally turned his attention to the walking siren. Karen had planted herself at the fence line, sunglasses on, clutching a clipboard with the HOA logo, poorly printed and slightly smeared like it was a national security document. "I'm the compliance coordinator for the Ridgewood HOA," she declared, puffing out her chest. "These people are in direct violation of Section 14EB, unauthorized livestock on adjacent influence zones." Marcus tilted his head. "Adjacent influence zones?" "Yes," she said firmly, "a term used when non-HOA residents negatively impact HOA property values through odor, noise, or visual inconsistencies." He blinked, deadpan. "You made that up, didn't you?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a malfunctioning garage door. Then she recovered with a huff and handed him her clipboard. "Everything's on here. I have timestamps. I've been monitoring this property for weeks." Meanwhile, I retrieved a folder from our Barnes office, handed it to Marcus. Inside were aerial maps, land deed copies, and the zoning exemption issued 3 years ago. AG2, zoned for livestock and agricultural structures. We're outside Ridgewood HOA by 400 feet. No covenant restrictions, and that's my wife assaulted while feeding goats. Marcus studied the documents. "All signed, county stamped, updated this year. Looks airtight." He glanced at Karen. "You got anything that contradicts this?" Karen didn't even try to look. She was already pulling out her phone again, turning her back to him. "I'm going live. I have followers expecting updates." She spun the camera toward herself, instantly shifting tone. "This is Karen Delancey, Ridgewood Compliance Coordinator. Today we're addressing a high-level community threat, livestock terrorism, and aesthetic sabotage." Marvin, who had been nosing around the fence posts during this exchange, chose that moment to make his contribution. With slow, deliberate confidence, he ambled up behind Karen, sniffed once at her clipboard resting on the fence, and took a massive bite out of the corner. The sound of tearing paper was satisfyingly crisp. Karen screamed, "No, that's an official document." Marvin didn't blink. He just kept chewing. Gasps and snorts of laughter rippled through the small crowd. One of the kids across the road shouted, "Yo, the goat's eating the evidence." And then came the best line of the day. A girl, maybe 7, standing behind her mom, tugged her sleeve and asked loud enough for half the block to hear, "Mom, is the goat suing her now?" Her mom tried not to laugh. Tyler, meanwhile, had caught the entire thing on video and was already uploading it to his TikTok account, muttering, "This is gonna blow up." Marcus handed Karen's half-eaten clipboard back to her like it was a chewed-up shoe. "Ma'am, unless you have valid legal authority here, which you don't, you need to vacate the premises. This land's private and legally exempt." Karen's nostrils flared. "I don't recognize this so-called exemption. This is a coordinated smear campaign against Ridgewood." She turned back to her live stream, waving the half-eaten clipboard like a protest sign. But her tone had shifted. Desperation had started to leak through the cracks, and I could tell she wasn't planning to walk away from this. Not yet. Karen was still waving the chewed clipboard in one hand, her phone in the other, ranting something about civil infractions and biological sabotage when Marvin made his second move. He reached up calmly, almost respectfully, and tugged at the rest of the paper flapping from her hand. She pulled back. Marvin pulled harder. What followed was a short but glorious tug-of-war between an entitled HOA vigilante and a goat with no patience for nonsense, and Marvin won. Karen lost her footing with a dramatic yelp, tripped over the uneven edge of the field, and tumbled backward straight into the shallow irrigation ditch behind the fence. The splash was theatrical. Water and mud sprayed up in all directions, soaking her from the waist down. Her phone flew from her hand, landed in the reeds with a pathetic plop, and immediately vanished from sight. Her scream, somewhere between horror and indignation, echoed off the barn wall like a broken clarinet. Everyone went silent for a beat, stunned by the sheer visual poetry of it. Then Marvin trotted to the fence, still chewing her official document like it was a reward for public service. Emily, who had been sitting nearby and recovering slowly, choked out a laugh. "Marvin, you beautiful chaos goblin," she whispered. The crowd of neighbors erupted, not into full-blown laughter, but that shoulder-shaking, lip-biting kind of reaction when you're trying not to enjoy something that absolutely deserves to be enjoyed. Tyler turned his GoPro toward the ditch. "Oh my God," he whispered. "That's the thumbnail." Karen flailed in the mud, her sunglasses crooked, hair stuck to her forehead, and her pristine HOA vest now a soggy relic. "That goat attacked me. He's trained. You saw it. This is animal warfare," she shrieked, pointing at Marvin, who looked entirely unbothered and promptly pooped next to a potted plant. Marcus exhaled like he was suppressing 10 years of secondhand HOA rage. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you leave the property before you rack up more charges. Trespassing, assault, and now destruction of your own evidence." He turned to me. "Daniel, you have full standing to request a restraining order based on what I've seen today. The assault, the trespassing, the ongoing harassment, it's all documented. If you want to press charges, you'd be well within your rights." I nodded slowly. "We'll do whatever it takes to keep her away from my wife." Emily gave a quiet thumbs up, still grinning weakly. Karen, now dragging herself up the muddy bank with the grace of a drenched raccoon, pointed a trembling, muddy finger in our direction. "Oh, this isn't over," she bellowed. The crowd went quiet. A goat somewhere bleated in the distance. And then Tyler, not missing a beat, murmured, "It is now," as he hit upload on his phone. Karen froze for a second, realizing her performance had been live broadcast not just to her followers, but to half the town. She stood there, face streaked with mud, HOA badge hanging by a thread, framed perfectly against the sunset as her failed conquest went viral in real time. I didn't smile, not yet, but I knew one thing. Whatever Karen had planned next, whatever fantasy of compliance power she thought she wielded, it was slipping through her fingers faster than Marvin could chew through laminate. And something told me she wasn't done embarrassing herself just yet. Karen may have limped off the property that day, soaked in ditch water and public humiliation, but she clearly hadn't run out of steam. A week passed, and just as Emily was starting to feel more like herself again, slow walks around the garden, occasional belly kicks from our future daughter, a black sedan pulled up to our gate. The man who stepped out wore a pressed gray suit, mirrored sunglasses, and carried a briefcase like it contained state secrets. He introduced himself as Mr. Halpern, legal representative of the Ridgewood HOA, and asked if we could chat about a few pressing concerns. That was lawyer speak for "you're about to get handed something stupid." Mr. Halpern handed me a manila envelope, thick enough to serve as a doorstop. "You are hereby notified that the Ridgewood HOA is pursuing civil action regarding property devaluation due to unregulated livestock odors, visual inconsistencies, and auditory disturbances." I stared at him. "Auditory disturbances?" "The goats," he clarified like I was supposed to feel ashamed. Emily, who'd come to the porch with a glass of lemonade in her usual unshakable calm, raised an eyebrow. "You're suing us because our goats exist?" He nodded gravely as though he were announcing a trial at The Hague. "They bleat loudly, and there have been complaints." I asked him to wait, went into the barn office, and came back with our full documentation: zoning exemption, land deed, soil classification, all county approved. Emily added the printed stills from our security camera and handed over a USB drive containing video footage of Karen's greatest hits, namely the assault and her starring role in Karen Meets Ditch. I slid it across the table. "If you're seriously pushing this, you might want to watch those clips first." Mr. Halpern looked uneasy. "Video evidence, multiple angles," I said. "GoPro, ring cam, community phones, and we have 10 neighbor statements if you're hungry for more." Emily leaned forward slightly. "Also," she added, "I'd love to hear your legal basis for enforcing HOA rules on land that's outside the HOA. That part should be fun." Mr. Halpern paused, thumbing through the documents. "The client in question assures me that there is historical precedence." His voice trailed off as he examined the map, the signatures, and the county seal. Then he turned the last page, saw the photo of Karen mid-splash, mid-scream, and blinked twice. "Karen Delancey?" he asked. I nodded. He blinked again. "You mean that Karen?" I didn't answer. Emily didn't either. The silence was loud. Mr. Halpern closed the folder slowly, cleared his throat, and mumbled something about needing to reassess strategy before shuffling back to his car. We watched him drive off without another word. As the dust settled, I looked at Emily and said, Think that counts as a tactical retreat? She sipped her lemonade. More like self-preservation, but it wasn't the end. We knew Karen wouldn't go down with just a legal hiccup. If anything, this attempt felt like a warm-up. And something told me the real performance was still ahead in court. We didn't hear from Karen again until a court summons arrived via certified mail, complete with bolded accusations, HOA letterhead, and a scheduled hearing date in county court. Emily looked up from the document and smirked. She's going all in. I nodded. Karen's final boss arc. The morning of the hearing, we dressed with the kind of quiet resolve reserved for funerals and graduations. Emily wore a flowing navy dress that complemented her baby bump and calm demeanor. I wore my cleanest boots. We brought our folder of evidence, a flash drive with video clips, and the support of 3 neighbors who volunteered to testify. And Marvin, he stayed home, but spiritually he was with us. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. A few curious locals slipped into the benches like it was open mic night. Karen entered 10 minutes late wearing all black, a dramatic silk scarf, and a neck brace so stiff it looked like she stole it from a community theater prop bin. She walked with exaggerated limping, clutching her clipboard like a holy relic. Her lawyer, a sweaty man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, carried a binder labeled Visual and Emotional Damages. Karen shot us a smug glance, then whispered something to her counsel with the enthusiasm of someone who thought they were about to win an Emmy. The judge, a woman named Honorable Linda Strauss, late 50s, gray, bob haircut, glasses perched low on her nose, asked for opening statement. Karen's lawyer launched into a wild tale of emotional trauma, goat-induced anxiety, and neighborhood degradation caused by unchecked barnyard influence. Then, as the piece de resistance, he played a short video, and edited, of course, where Karen yells, spins, and falls, making it look like Marvin had lunged at her with malicious, and there was a pause. Then the judge asked, "Is that the full recording?" That's when our attorney stood up cool as a breeze and inserted our flash drive. What played next was comedy gold. Karen trespassing, yelling about biological terrorism, launching a kick into Emily's ribs, then being dragged into a ditch by a goat named Marvin while screaming, "This isn't over." The room rippled with poorly stifled laughter. Someone in the back actually whispered, "Legend." The judge didn't laugh, but she did raise a single eyebrow and sigh. "I don't know," she muttered. "Who's more out of control, you or the goat?" Karen's lawyer turned pink. Karen tried to adjust her neck brace, but it popped sideways like a crooked halo. After reviewing our documents, statements, and county zoning exemptions, Judge Strauss made her ruling crystal clear. The lawsuit was baseless. The HOA had no jurisdiction on our property. Karen had committed trespassing, assault, and defamation. She issued a restraining order effective immediately, along with mandatory anger management classes and a fine that nearly made Karen faint. To top it off, the court issued a formal reprimand to the Ridgewood HOA for irresponsible delegation of authority to an unqualified individual. In other words, they put a clipboard in the wrong hands and the whole town watched it burn. As we left the courtroom, a few local reporters and curious neighbors congratulated Emily, who smiled and gave a polite nod while holding my arm. Tyler, the GoPro kid, was waiting outside with a homemade sticker that read, "Justice Go 2024. "He's trending," he said, holding up his phone. "Got 3.2 million views. People want shirts." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I just said, "Make sure Marvin gets royalties." But even as we stepped into the sunlight and took our first deep breath of freedom, we both knew one thing. Karen wasn't done. Not yet. Not by a long shot. Karen didn't appeal the ruling. She didn't show up for her anger management classes either, from what we heard. But she did one thing promptly. She sold her house. Within 2 weeks of the court decision, a for sale sign popped up on her HOA-approved lawn, and the neighborhood let out a collective sigh that could have powered a wind turbine. Rumor had it she left Ridgewood entirely, packed her clipboard, neck brace, and wounded pride, and headed for a gated community somewhere in Florida. No one threw her a goodbye party. A few neighbors toasted quietly on their porches when the moving truck pulled away. Life in Copper Ridge began to shift almost overnight. Emily gave birth to a healthy baby girl, Grace Ellen Dwyer, on a quiet spring morning, with the goats bleating softly outside the window like furry midwives. Grace had her mother's calm eyes and my unfortunate habit of waking up before sunrise. We joked that she entered the world already skeptical of HOA regulations. The day we brought her home, someone had tied a blue ribbon to our gate, and Pete from down the road dropped off a casserole with a sticky note that read, "Welcome home, baby Grace. Marvin says hi." Soon after, a handful of neighbors, most of whom had stayed silent during the whole saga, started putting up little homemade signs on their fences. They read things like, "No HOA, yes goats," or "Bleed happens." Tyler, ever the entrepreneur, had printed out Justice Goat bumper stickers and was giving them away in exchange for donations to the local animal shelter. Even the local coffee shop caught wind and changed one of their drinks to a caramel latte called the Marvin. It came with a goat-shaped cookie. I'm not kidding. We decided to repaint the sign out front to mark the new chapter. Emily suggested something lighthearted, and I figure she earned that right. So I hired a local artist to sketch Marvin's smug little face into the corner of our wooden gate, ears up, clipboard in his mouth like a trophy. Underneath in hand-carved letters, it now reads, "Welcome to Dwyer Farm, protected by hooves and truth." It was our way of telling the world we weren't going anywhere. I still installed a few extra cameras just in case Karen ever developed the urge for a dramatic sequel. But mostly life was quiet again. Emily walks Grace through the garden each morning. The goats have chilled out considerably, as if they too sensed the storm had passed. And every so often someone new drives by, slows down to read the sign and gives a little wave. We wave back. No HOA clipboard, no citations. Just neighbors, land, and a baby who squeals every time Marvin walks by. In a town once divided by fences, it was a goat that united them, and as the sun rises over Copper Ridge, casting golden light over dirt paths and pasture, I know this much is true. Peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing your ground, with grace, with humor, and if you're lucky, with a goat named Marvin. So what did we learn? First, never underestimate a goat with an appetite for paperwork. Second, when someone shows up screaming about aesthetic violations on land they don't own, maybe just let the goats handle it. Justice doesn't always arrive on a shiny badge. Sometimes it trots up on 4 hooves and eats your clipboard. Here at Copper Ridge, we believe in family, freedom, and the sacred right to raise loud, stinky, wonderful animals without HOA drama. If this story made you laugh, roll your eyes, or whisper, "Karen had it coming," go ahead, drop a comment, share it with a friend, or tell us your own HOA horror story below. And remember, when in doubt, trust the goat. Marvin's watching.